So if this was to be the case, then we would be we would be reversing the cycle to some degree. In the traditional cycle, you create the document type definition or the schema. You then take the poems that you want to mark up and you mark them up in accordance with the schema. You then write a style sheet which presents them to the user. Suppose we were to mix it up. Suppose we were to start, first of all, with the text which we mark up however we like. Then we take that markup and from it we derive a document type definition or schema. And then try to turn it into something that is legible on the screen and see what happens. So this was acting out our fantasies of being totally free from editorial constraints whatsoever. We were out to have fun and see if it led us somewhere. So here's an example. Because Craig's working on Ted Hughes, we worked on a couple of poems by Ted Hughes. One of them was Crow Tyrannosaurus. And here you can see, here's an example of a few lines from Crow Tyrannosaurus. Crow could hear and he looked around fearfully. The swift body fled past, pulsating with insects. Now, we looked at that and asked ourselves, okay, what is going, as an end user, what is hitting me? And the thing that hit us, actually it hit me and I forced Craig to go along with it, was that there is a tension between horizontal and vertical perspectives in the poem. That you have at times a distinct horizontal progress and at other times you have a vertical progress where the lines get very short and the sentence and the meaning seem to be moving downwards rather than across. So we saw it, I saw it, as a table of sorts where you have a combination of rows and columns. And if you take the lines, we split the lines according to this table. So you have the swift's body as the first cell in the row, fled past, pulsating with insects and their anguish, all at evening. And in the last stanza of the poem, we have, it resolves into an almost perfect tension between the horizontal and the vertical, and we go down in an almost 45-degree angle. Thus came the eye's roundness, the ear's deafness. Working on this response to the poem, we created, we used that to create our markup. Now when we looked at the cells in the rows, we also felt that there was very often a relationship between the first cell and the second cell. And so we created attributes which defined the kind of relationship that we perceive. So in the first case, we have the line, and the dog was a bulging filter bag. And we saw that as the second cell was the predicate of the first. Okay, you had subject and you had predicate. In the second line, we saw this as, but his eye saw a grub, and his head traps from stab. And we saw that as a conjunction. The third is an example of what struck us as a deliberate evocation of Anglo-Saxon poetry, in the alliterative tradition, of incoming death struggles, sorrow on sorrow. Right back to my old Anglo-Saxon days, etc. And the fourth was an example of what we thought of as a grid. Grubs, grubs, he stabbed, he stabbed. Now, we were doing none of this with any particular expertise on Ted Hughes, none of this expressing any kind of editorial or sophisticated critical response. This was just readers responding to the poem. So here's an example of a section. We defined the element table with a row, the relation equals predicate, cell creation, cell quaked voices, it was a cortege of mourning and lament, Crow could hear, and he looked around fearfully. In each case, we've got a table, a repeatable number of rows, each with one or more cells. And that's how we split the poem up. The second poem we looked at was a poem called Crow's First Lesson. here we envisioned this as a structure whereby you have the title and then you have the content of the poem, and in the content you start with a scenario. God tried to teach Crow how to talk. Following that scenario, we have the scenario and we have a conclusion. In between the scenario and the conclusion, we have a repeating sequence of a repeating number of sequences which go from an instruction to a response to the instruction, the consequence of that instruction, and then what we call a breath, which basically signifies the stanza break. So you have a series of do this, Crow tries to do it, there is a response, after that response there is a breath. Now, not all of those elements are present in the sequence. As you get down closer, you have multiple responses, so the instruction isn't repeated. But we defined it as that basic structure. So here, for instance, we have God tried to teach Crow how to talk. Love, said God, say love. You have the response, the actor of the response is Crow, and we came up with a rough and ready measure of the intensity. Since Crow's responses increase in intensity as the poem goes on, we gave it a low rating for intensity. Crow gaped, and the white shark crashed into the sea and went rolling downwards, discovering its own depth as the consequence. And then we have the breath at the end.